Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? Yo soy Sofía Macías, la autora de los libros de Pequeño, Cerdo, Capitalista, y hoy estoy especialmente emocionada porque vamos a tener a Mori Taheripour, la experta en negociación y autora de este librazo que se llama Esto es Personal. Yo de verdad tenía 2 años esperando hacer esta entrevista y este libro es una super joya. De hecho, puedes encontrar la reseña aquí en el canal del Pequeño Cerdo Capitalista. Así que vamos a platicar, de ¿qué errores comunes tenemos en la idea de qué es una negociación? Si solamente la gente súper agresiva y Terminator sirve para esto, o realmente los empáticos y que luego creemos que nos pasamos de buena onda también lo podemos hacer bien. ¿Cómo ponerle límites financieros a tus seres queridos? Y hasta qué pasa con las finanzas de los deportistas, porque ella está en ese campo, así que te va a encantar esta entrevista. Una pequeñísima advertencia: la entrevista va a estar en inglés, pero va a estar con subtítulos, así que con muchísima atención y de verdad aprovecha todo lo que nos viene a compartir Mori Taheripour. As I told you, Mori, I'm really thrilled to have this interview. I've been waiting 2 years to talk to you. When I read Esto es Personal, that is the title in Spanish of your book, I was like, wow, this was the book that was missing on negotiation for people that normally do not relate to very hard, like killer negotiation books. So thank you so much for being today here in Pequeño Cerdo Capitalista.
Of course, you came out of nowhere. I just saw you all of a sudden online, and I'm so grateful for your support.
Well, Mori, what would be like your favorite definition of negotiation?
Well, there's like a million different ways to look at this, but I think because I'm so much more fond of looking at negotiations from not a transactional perspective, but from a humanity perspective. I always think about negotiations as being obviously a conversation between 2 people, 3 people, however many people, even with yourself, when you're trying to solve some kind of a problem, right? When you're trying to come to a resolution of some sort, when you're trying to make a big decision and come at it not from a place of transactions, but from more of a long-term relationship perspective, which doesn't necessarily change the definition of it so much as it does the approach to it.
I love the fact that you're using the word conversation, and we will talk about this a little bit later. But yeah, I think that's clue, and that's one of the things I like the most about your book. Most books on negotiation are like shark books, or they are designed to be aggressive. Actually, when we did the first review of your book, what we said is like, how can you negotiate without being a Terminator, like this James Cameron movie?
Yeah.
How did you discover there was another way to get great negotiations? Is there anything that happened in your life that made you have a different perspective on this?
Not necessarily. I mean, I was an entrepreneur for a really, really long time, but I think it's just sort of, and with being an entrepreneur, this is all you're doing all the time is negotiating. But I think that even outside of that realm, when I really thought about what negotiations meant to me in my life, a lot of it had been personal decisions. A lot of it had been with family members, my parents, with myself. Some of the biggest, probably most significant negotiations in my life has been with myself, making big, heavy decisions and having to be okay with whatever the outcome is. And then moving on from there, I actually, and a lot of us do this that teach negotiations. We watch a whole lot of movies, and we watch political figures. We watch famous negotiators. We look at diplomats, and we sort of want to understand the scope of different styles of negotiations that are out there. And yes, to your point, unfortunately, what we see in society a lot is, and in the movies, right, we see the really aggressive, in your face, kind of bullying type negotiators. And that never really appealed to me. I was always really drawn to more of sort of the diplomatic style, statesmen, statespeople, ambassadors. I was always drawn to the personality type of somebody like Nelson Mandela, who's probably one of the finest negotiators of our time ever. And what sort of intrigued me about those negotiations type personalities was that they were everything but the aggressive types that we saw in the movies and, often sort of held up as being the example of great negotiators. The Nelson Mandelas of the world, the statesmen, the diplomats, the ambassador types. What was appealing to me was that they didn't lead with what was only their agenda. They led with curiosity. They led with this notion of, to come to a good agreement, it's not just my way, it's our way. And we got to find a path there. And it didn't mean that they were always negotiating with people that they liked. Again, case in point, Nelson Mandela. But what they put in front of their own sort of personal likes or dislikes was the benefit to everyone that came out of that negotiations. And whether, again, it was the two people or it was an entire nation, it was really about something so much more than just a transaction. And if you think about it that way, then it can't just be about you getting your way and being in somebody's face and being aggressive. It's like an elegant dance.
Do you think that this has to do with the focus we have on negotiation? Maybe if you are just short term, okay, being aggressive, it's okay, maybe you will get your result. But if you are meant to have a long-term business, personal, or whatever relationship, maybe that style will not necessarily benefit the negotiation.
I do. I think when people say, well, it doesn't matter because I'll never see this person again, or this is just a one-time deal, I honestly think that gives us permission to behave badly. And because you think I can say whatever or do whatever and I won't ever have to deal with this person again. So I think just telling yourself that creates that type of a distance from the other person and doesn't make you think about, okay, if I do this today, how will this affect our relationship in the future? Because you're taking away the relationship. I think that, and I want to sort of make this clear, it's not that the aggressive types aren't successful negotiators, right? It's that every type of person can be a great negotiator. You just have to be somebody who is sort of honoring your own values, and you're exactly who you think and say you are in those negotiations, because it's not a script, it's natural to you. And so long as I think you do that, then you're true to yourself. So I want to kind of make that distinction, because it's not just one way. I know we all do plenty of negotiators who are successful and yet have more of that domineering personality. It's across the board. So if people are values oriented or they're relationship oriented, they're likely to look at every one of these interactions as maybe a long-term prospect. They care how the other person's going to walk away. I think
that's what I love, that the book is called Bring Yourself. So you just have to take advantage of what you have. I think that generally people, when they think of negotiators, they think of these negotiators that are very aggressive, very dominant. And the general conception is that maybe if you are like a person with a lot of empathy or too nice, you won't get results. That's actually what I liked about your book, because you don't necessarily have to leave everything on the table or break relationships. Mm-hmm. How can these personalities that are like softer, or let's not say soft, but more with more empathy, or that it makes them like uncomfortable to have very, very frontal conversations, how can they take this into their advantage? How can they take empathy or being good listeners, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Because I think we like to interact with people who respect us. I think we like to be in relationships with or have conversations with people who are interested in us. And that allows us to feel like we're not competing for attention, or that this person actually cares about what the outcome of the negotiations is going to be from both of our perspectives. And those individuals, right, when they actually enjoy negotiations with somebody, are likely to want to stay in this type of relationship for long durations of time. So you're going to come back to somebody who treats you well. You're going to come back to somebody who tries to understand you. It's not the other way around. And so why empathy is so important, why I think it's so important to think about respecting your counterpart or counterparts, is that you're not, you used softer before and you sort of took it back. I was going to say, these aren't soft skills. These are actually really hard skills in some ways, because it requires things like emotional intelligence. It requires good listening skills. It requires that you're curious. And when you do that, you listen more, as opposed to thinking you know everything. You are coming to the table with an open mind and an open heart. And I think that makes you an exceptional negotiator, because you're always in this mode of learning and fact-finding. You're not making decisions because you've assumed something. You're making decisions because you've learned something about this person or about the situation better than you were before you walked into the conversation. So empathy, respect, great listening, emotional intelligence, all of these types of skill sets and tools that we can pull on make us better negotiators, and not weaker negotiators. I think more strategic negotiators.
Of course, those are very valuable skills. Regarding like the misconceptions of negotiation, we just talked about a myth that there's not one type of personality that is good for negotiation or bad. But which other misconceptions have you found that you think this is the typical myth that people should forget about?
Oh, there are so many misconceptions.
Maybe 2 or 3 we can talk about those.
Who likes conflict, right? So that is one of those misconceptions that has affected gender dynamics. It affects, in the workplace, a lot of people don't like asking for pay raises. And, so I see it in my younger students, I see it in women, I see it in all kinds of people. And when you ask them why, they say, because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to be in conflict with this person. I don't want to be thought of as being greedy. I don't want this to cause any harm or any damage to the relationship. In my mind, negotiations is our life. Everything we do is a negotiations. Every moment, from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go to sleep at night. If you think it's conflict, you don't want to do it. But if you think about this being life and something that not only have you done your entire life, but because it's so relevant to your life, that you should get better, that you would try to get better. So a lot of myths, and they're quite damaging, I think.
And sometimes it's because we have done it all our life, but maybe not in the best way. So which are like these stages or these important things that we should be learning in order, of course, reading your book, but what should we be learning in order to be better negotiators? I really like the part where you talk about preparing, or the research before a negotiation,
right?
For example, in a race. But what do you think that it's important, and why people normally fail or feel very bad at negotiations?
Well, preparation is certainly incredibly important, right? It sets the groundwork for everything. And a lot of times I say you can never be too prepared in negotiations, right? There's no limit. And the more you learn, the better off you are. The more confident you become, the less of a surprise things appear in the moment, right? Because you've sort of planned and you've done scenario planning. So planning for different things that may happen or come up in the conversation. You've researched the person with whom you're negotiating. Very important, right? But one of the most important things is actually, and this is sort of where it all starts for me, is really sort of looking inward, right? Thinking about who you are, what it is that you want from this. What are the things that are most important to you, that you don't want to compromise, that are sort of what we call non-negotiables. So getting to know yourself better and doing that work, again, looking inward and not always outward, I think is super, super critical. And so, yes, it's part of preparation, but that's sort of the work that we have to do in our life, right? To really acknowledge our own value, to know what we are bringing to the table that means something, that's important. The other side of it is sort of that more of that sort of self-reflection and taking that quiet moment, taking that time to really settle yourself, right? To ground yourself and to be very present, right? The other part of that is put your phones away, put all the distractions away, right? Make sure that you're paying full attention. Make sure that you are there so that the other person doesn't think, am I more important or the phone call that they just got? Those are all the things that are both strategic, but incredibly important to the dialogue.
I love the fact that you just mentioned, we really need to know our value. There's an example in your book of an exercise that you give to your students where they have to, I think they have to sell an apartment. Mm-hmm. And one is like very much on top and maybe they have no maintenance. Mm-hmm. And you have like two different students that they tell the story different and get different results. Do you think that this is something that happens very often, that we don't really know the value of something or of ourselves?
Oh, yeah. That may be probably the biggest challenge that I see for a lot of people in negotiations. It's I guess it's hand in hand with having confidence, but really believing in yourself and knowing how important you are to this entire conversation, right? That your happiness, your fulfillment, your desires are just as important as the other person's, right? And I think that the example that you're talking about in the book just shows how some people have the ability to see bigger things, better things, more aspirational things. They look at everything from that point of value and possibility when it comes to themselves, or if they're selling something or they're representing somebody. Then there are the other people who are too worried, maybe about what other people see them as, maybe the judgment, maybe they're not allowing themselves, maybe that's cultural. But whatever it is, they talk to themselves in a way that brings them fear, it brings them anxiety, and it holds them back, quite frankly. So that example was really about how two people can see the same situation. And the person who can't see the value and can't speak about the value, can't see the worth, always pokes holes in their own stories, always brings out the negatives instead of thinking about the positives. And it's very hard to sell, whether it's an apartment or a car or yourself, when all you're doing is thinking about all the things that are wrong instead of telling the story about all the things that are right.
Yeah, because sometimes what you see as a flaw has other advantages or has something unique that nobody else has.
Right.
So
right.
You have to really think about that. There's something very interesting about negotiation. You said before that a lot of people don't want to bring the conversations a raise or maybe a change in the relationship or whatever, because we are very much afraid of hurting the relationship. Mm-hmm. Or I think there's a bigger fear. Why are we so afraid of getting no for an answer?
Oh, because you feel rejected. You feel like you've been personally rejected. When you hear no, we feel like it's a no to us as a person. Whereas no typically is to an ask. No is typically if you want something from someone and they say no, maybe it's just a no to that thing, but not a no to you. So if you came back with something different, if you changed your ask, then that could be a yes, right? So I think those two letters, the word no is very, very, people take it deeply personally. And it's a hard word to hear because you feel like the door is closed. And I always think that actually a no can be very positive because they don't just say no and then you're like, oh my God, that's the end. If they say no, then you can actually follow up and say, okay, I understand. Why does it not work? Or is there something else that I can offer you that would be better? Is there something I can change that would make this work for you? And to ask those questions may actually allow you to problem solve as opposed to thinking, that's it, that's the end of the conversation. They don't like me, they don't value me, they don't want to do this for me. All the personalization of it, it's just not true. But it hurts. It's our ego, to be honest with you. It's hurting our ego. That's really the thing that makes hearing the word no so difficult.
Actually, that idea is very powerful. I read it in your book, and it was phrased in Spanish something like, a no is not the end, but the beginning of a conversation. And when I saw that, was like, of course, if you can ask why not, or what else could we do, then the conversation changes and you're open to possibilities. And maybe, for example, if okay, I want a raise, okay, it's not possible. Why not? Do I need to raise my goals, or can we do it a little bit later? But at least you're opening the door.
Yes. And you're getting information, right? I think the very